Today, we are diving into a connection that you'd probably never, ever think of. We're talking about the ancient Japanese art of Shibari rope binding and neuro-linguistic programming, a totally modern way of understanding the mind. How on earth can a physical art form and a mental science speak the same language? Well, that's what we're here to find out.
And it really is an unlikely pairing, isn't it? On one hand, you've got an art form. It's expressed through the body, and it has centuries of physical tradition behind it. On the other, you have a modern science, focused completely on the patterns inside our own heads. So, where's the overlap?
And that's the big question, right? That's the puzzle at the core of this whole explainer. And believe me, the answer is more than just a cool piece of trivia. It actually tells us something really profound about the hidden link between physical restriction and mental freedom. So let's break it down. You've got Shibari, it's physical, it's ancient, and it's definitely an art. Then you have neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, it's mental, it's modern, and it's framed as a science. To see how they connect, we've got to understand each one on its own turf first. So let's start with the art of the rope. To really get what Shibari is all about, you have to look way beyond just the knots and ties. At its very heart, it's an aesthetic and philosophical practice, and it has a surprisingly deep history. So the word Shibari itself is pretty simple. It literally just means to tie. But its origins? They actually come from Hojojutsu, which was the set of martial techniques that samurai used to restrain prisoners. Over hundreds of years, though, that purely practical skill evolved, and it transformed into this incredibly sophisticated art form, packed with its own meaning and principles.
And okay, this is where it gets really deep. Shibari is guided by some core Japanese philosophies. You've got Ma, which is all about valuing the pause, the empty space between things. There's Wabi-sabi, which is about finding beauty in things that are imperfect or temporary. Ikigai, the idea that the practice can be a path to finding your life's purpose. And Zanshin, a state of total but relaxed awareness. See, this is so much more than ropes. It's a whole mindset.
Okay, so that's the art. Now for the science. Let's pivot and build up our second pillar, neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. When you boil it all down, it's really the study of excellence, what makes successful people tick and how they do it. NLP came about in the 1970s, and its whole deal isn't really about what we think, but how we think. The core idea is actually pretty simple. If you can map out the mental patterns of someone who's excellent at something, you can learn to use those same patterns yourself. Now, NLP is built on these foundational beliefs they call presuppositions. For example, the map is not the territory, meaning our perception of the world isn't the world itself. All behavior has a positive intention, the idea that every action we take is trying to achieve something for us. And this one's a big one for our story today. All behavior is communication. Keep that one in your back pocket. Okay, so we've got our two pillars, a physical art and a mental science. They feel like they're from different planets, right? But this is where it gets crazy. When you actually place them side by side, the points where they meet, they're absolutely remarkable.
I mean, look at this. The parallels are just stunningly direct. Shibari's intense focus on nonverbal cues and breath, that is exactly what NLP calls calibration. That deep psychological safety you need for the art, that's the entire goal of building rapport in the science. Both of them demand this heightened sensory awareness, and both can guide a person into these incredibly powerful mental states, whether you call it flow or meditation or what NLP would call a resourceful state. They're just using different words to describe the same deep human experiences.
Let's make this super practical. The source material actually lays out a mutual calibration protocol for Shibari that, honestly, you could lift straight out of an NLP textbook. It starts with just observing, posture, breath, tension. Then you sync your breathing. After that, progressive contact, and finally, you establish this nonverbal conversation. It's a perfect fusion of both worlds, a clear roadmap for building profound trust and connection. So we've seen how they connect, but the real question, the big so what, is why does any of this matter? Well, this synthesis, this combination, it offers something truly game-changing, a powerful new way to look at our relationship with limitations themselves. There's this quote from the source material that just hits the nail on the head. The restriction is not a limit, but a secure framework for exploring a deep inner freedom. Just let that sink in for a second. What if the very thing that feels like a limitation, the ropes, a difficult emotion, a creative block, is actually the exact structure you need to discover a whole new kind of freedom?
And this leads us to this really cool, almost alchemical idea. The power to transform the lead of a perceived limitation into the gold of a personal resource. This concept, this idea of transformation through pressure, it's at the very heart of both advanced Shibari and NLP's most powerful techniques.
In fact, the source gives us a brilliant mental model for this. They call it the diamond technique. Here's how it works. First, you just acknowledge a feeling of pressure. No judgment, just notice it. Then you reframe it. This isn't a destructive force, it's a creative force, like the pressure that forges a diamond. Next, you start to notice the qualities that are emerging because of that pressure, things like strength, clarity, resilience. And finally, you integrate that new resource. It's literally a blueprint for turning pressure into power.
And that's the real takeaway here, you know? We've explored this idea through the lens of Shibari and NLP, but this toolkit, this way of reframing our challenges, of seeing limitations as a gateway to freedom, that's something you can apply to pretty much anything in your life.
So I'll leave you with this to think about. What perceived limitation in your life, what rope, what restriction, if you just looked at it with fresh eyes, might actually hold the key to a hidden strength?